I was given 20 minutes on the agenda, so I'm going to rattle through this fairly quickly, in that I can talk for hours, as those of you who know me a little bit will probably know well. And the reason I can talk for hours is that I'm really boring and blog every single day at thefinancer.com about technology and financial services. And I've been doing that every single day for over 10 years. So I'm truly dull. Some people emailed me before I came along here and said they wanted to have a chat. And if I disappear before I get to talk to you, you can find me quite easily because I'm Chris at thefinancer.com. And so just ping me a note and I'll try and reply if you have any questions about what I'm talking about this morning. I've got a new book I'm just writing. So I've written 14 books. The last two are ValueWeb and Digital Bank. ValueWeb is all about blockchain. So it's how blockchain technologies are creating the internet of value. And in that book, there's quite a few interviews with people from Ripple and various companies that might be of interest to you at the Bitcoin Foundation. It's done quite well. That came out last year. But my new book is actually more exciting for me because it's about humans rather than technology. And it's all about the fourth age of humanity, which is a 1-hour presentation that I'm not going to do this morning. But the reason why it's important as a backdrop to mention that is that the fourth revolution in humans, which we're going through right now, is one where suddenly we're all connected in real time, globally, one-to-one, person-to-person, device-to-device. And that's truly revolutionary, that the planet is digitalized. And when you think about financial inclusion, for example, as I spend all my time looking at financial services, suddenly 5 billion people who had limited access to the financial network can actually send value one-to-one in real time, globally, instantaneously. And that's truly transformational. So it gets interesting because then you think about, well, how do you build a truly transformational financial system around this 7 billion people connected? And that's where we're seeing so much change so rapidly taking place right now. Every day there's a headline about something that's going to hit you in the face around technology. For example, this is something that I picked up yesterday talking to some people in governance, risk and compliance, and just thought the semantic web is something that was being envisaged 10 years ago. And yet now the technologies of the semantic web are all coming to crystallization. But no one envisaged in the semantic web the distributed ledger technology of blockchain because it didn't exist 10 years ago, except maybe it's a concept in some people's minds, Satoshi Nakamoto. And now, when we think about these technologies, they're actually foundational technologies of the planet, just like TCP/IP of the internet. It's actually truly transformational because what it's going to do is enable people on this planet to live in a digitalized world far more easily and conveniently and seamlessly than ever before in the way we transact, trade, talk. Now, blockchain is getting a lot of attention. This is just in the last week, the three big headlines that I caught around developments around distributed ledgers and blockchains. There's so much taking place because it is a foundational technology of the transformation of our planet. And when we think about the transformation of our planet, we can see what's happening when we look at how companies are changing, how businesses are changing, how the way in which we think about the industrial era seems now a dinosaur age. These dinosaur companies that made cars, whereas now we have internet-enabled transport pods coming from Tesla and Apple. All the companies with the greatest market valuation are now digital companies, because that is where the focus is. And digital companies don't employ nearly as many people as industrial companies because they don't need them, because there's not so much heavy lifting in building the products that we build today. In banking, which is where I focus, the digital financial companies that have emerged are companies like PayPal with a valuation of $48 billion as of October last year. Interesting that Stripe is the new PayPal. And that's just an API for merchant checkout, valued at $5 billion in 2015, $9 billion in 2016. So it doubled in valuation near enough in 1 year. That's a 5-year-old company. Even newer company is Ant Financial that owns the Alipay wallet, which is the biggest mobile wallet in the world. More people pay using a mobile wallet in China than with cash, and Alipay is their chosen wallet to do that. It's valued at $60 billion. And you think about Deutsche Bank, which has been through a crisis, and Ant Financial is worth 4 Deutsche Banks. A new fintech startup worth 4 times the value of a 200-year-old bank. It's worth twice the amount of Barclays Bank. Barclays from 1692 rather, when they started. 130,000 employees, Ant Financial 5,000. This is a different age that we're going through. And this is really the start point of how I think we need to think about blockchain, that this is truly transformational. It's a different age. And when we think about maybe the most successful bank in the world by market valuation, which is JP Chase, then Stripe's employees are doing far better than JP Chase's. Okay, it's bucking the numbers a little bit because this is based on market valuations of new unicorns. But it is the truly transformational, exciting process we're going through, which is why these companies are valued as unicorns, because suddenly they're changing the planet, digitalizing the planet, making the planet work better. So in terms of getting towards blockchain itself and distributed ledger technologies and where that fits, for me it's the virality of this network that is going to be driven into this Internet of Value based around distributed ledger technologies. And the virality of the digital network is demonstrated quite fundamentally by things like Venmo. These two guys invented Venmo. And Venmo is a verb in America about, I've just Venmoed you the money I owe you for the cappuccino or for the panini. Yeah, and they invented this wallet in 2011 because Ikram forgot his wallet when he visited Andy for the weekend. And being millennials and developers, as you can tell from this photograph, they decided to develop something on PayPal that was an easy social mobile payment system. PayPal brought that system and now have marketed it like crazy. And as a result, in Q2 last year, it processed $4 billion. In Q3 last year, it processed $4.9 billion. In Q4 last year, it processed $5.6 billion in a quarter. So this is a $22 billion processing machine engine for social payments that are really small between friends, invented by millennials over a weekend because one guy forgot his wallet 5 years ago. And the reason why it's taken off so quickly is that it's the virality of the mobile network, the network effect. And we see that network effect transforming the world through the mobile network, such as Alipay, who I've already mentioned, owned by Ant Financial, such as Paytm in India, which is now also a verb in India for paying people. And bearing in mind the demonetization in India where they're trying to go cashless, this is one of the most important mobile wallets in that country and potentially, again, will rival Alipay over time. But in Africa, we can really see the transformation taking place through technology and digitalization and transformation, because in Africa, you've got people now who can transact, and they never could before, because they were off the network. 82% of Africans a year ago had a mobile subscription, 69% in 2015, more like 90% today. And 1 in 3 of those people who have mobile subscriptions are using their mobile as a mobile wallet to transact and trade money. In 19 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Tanzania, Ghana, Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, you've got people who are using mobile wallets more than bank accounts. Now, the reason why this gets important for blockchain is that if this guy who previously could only sell milk, meat, and leather to the local village can now sell milk, meat, and leather across the whole of Africa or across the whole of the world, how is the financial transaction structure and system enabling that to happen? You know, if I send money through SWIFT, it's expensive and slow. How can it be real-time and cheap, almost free? And you know the answer, because it's blockchain. The question then is what blockchain? And what gets interesting right now is we talk about blockchain with so much certainty, and yet it's not certain at all. It's an experiment. It's a proof of concept in many instances. It's starting to come out of the conceptual phases into production. But one of the most radical places you'll see it take place is in Africa, because the United Nations and the World Bank and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are working on a digital identity scheme for 7 billion people using mobile wallets and distributed ledgers. And that, to me, is going to be the most radical transformation, if it happens, that we'll see as a foundational technology for the future, because that's where it truly is transformational. Because right now, 2.5 billion people don't exist on this planet. No one's ever recorded their birth. Therefore, if they are abducted, kidnapped, sold into sexual slavery, no one cares, except for obviously their family, but no one can find them because they're not recorded as existing. When sex traffickers take girls or boys from poor countries and trade them across Europe into richer countries, the first thing they do, if they have any identity, is destroy their documentation, because it's documentation. It needs to be digitalized. And so the United Nations has a number of sustainable goals to be achieved by the year 2030, one of which is in the 16th objective of inclusive societies. And in that objective, goal 16.9 is to give everybody a legal identity by 2030. And the United Nations had a meeting a year ago where basically the discussion was all about how to use mobile wallet with biometric technologies to record people's identities on a distributed ledger. Now, the real challenge in that program is how do you create a distributed ledger that everybody can identify and use and agree that it's going to be accepted. And that's why distributed ledgers and blockchain technology is going to take a long time to really kick in, because it's a lot of agreements that have to be in place before the technology can be deployed and used effectively. And that's where I think a lot of people have rose-tinted glasses, because they think this will transform in a few years. I go back to Bill Gates' comment around we overestimate the speed and underestimate the impact of the technologies. And this particular one, I think a lot of people have overestimated the speed of transformation. But if we do get those agreements to have a digital identity based on a distributed ledger using mobile wallets and biometrics coming out of Africa, supported by the United Nations, World Bank, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, won't we use that digital identity for everyone? Because it's cheap and it's real time. So, for example, in the Internet of Things, the fundamental grounding of the Internet of Things has to be a distributed ledger identity scheme. And the reason being is when I have all these things, such as my Mac, my phone, my watch, my TV, all Appleized, my fridge, my car, my house, everything is Apple. Well, sorry, I want to say maybe Android if you're in the room. Is the internet going to know that I've authorized my television to download Game of Thrones Season 8? How is it going to know that I've authorized my fridge to buy 12 liters of vodka because my Polish mother-in-law is coming over this week? How does it know? And I don't want to sit there and authorize every transaction that my TV and fridge and car is making, because that's boring. I just want to drive, consume, and watch. So the Internet of Things has to have an identity scheme to identify my things versus someone else's things. And that's going to be the transformational foundation technology that distributed ledger will deliver. Maybe using the African emerging identity scheme, or maybe using some other agreed scheme for the internet, because there can be multiple schemes. And if you look at digital identity experts, they will say that you'll have a sovereign identity that you then can release in various forms to different access services in different levels of access. But you own your scheme. You have a self-sovereign identity scheme. And self-sovereign identity schemes is one of the biggest areas of emerging startups in blockchain technologies for this reason. Now, I get a little bit annoyed about technology and technologists, because they do overestimate what blockchain can do, and they big it up, and they've made it into something that can pretty much do anything, which it maybe can. I mean, it's just a database on the internet that we share once we work out who's sharing it, how, and why. But the idea that this technology can save everything has led to a lot of disillusionment. I think we're actually right now in the trough of disillusionment of the blockchain technology, because so many people have been talking about it for so many years, and yet what's it delivered? Not much yet. It will, as I said already, it will change the planet, but saving the world. I was pretty intrigued with this paper that just came out last month in the Harvard Business Review, The Truth About Blockchain. And I think this illustrates where I believe it's happening very well, in that they compare the emergence of distributed ledgers and blockchain to the growth of the internet using TCP/IP technologies. And to begin with, that was just for email on a very controlled single-use basis, which is what Bitcoin payments is today, according to these two professors from Harvard. To get to the top right, self-executing smart contracts as a transformational foundational technology will take some time. It took 30 years for TCP/IP to go through these phases. I don't think it'll take 30, but it'll certainly take more than a few, 10 or 15. Right now, as I say, it's experiments. Which currency do you think will support your distributed ledger scheme, and why? Is it public, private, or hybrid? What's the usage? Who needs access? Do you trust the people who have access, in which case you don't even need a blockchain? And equally, blockchain is not a ledger. I got into huge arguments with some guy about 18 months ago who said that I kept talking about blockchain, and I was wrong. And then eventually I realized that what he was saying is that the reason I'm wrong is that blockchain is part of a distributed ledger, but not the other way around. So a blockchain records the transactions, records the movements, but you need to have some form of consensus mechanism. You need to have some form of digital signature, and you don't always, but you probably need some form of digital currency that goes around that for a distributed ledger scheme. Then it gets interesting because I'm now on the advisory board of the Internet of Things Association, IOTA, which are using Tangle, which is not a chain at all, so drop the chain. That's the reason why this is early days of a foundational, transformational technology, but it is early days. But everyone's excited about it, particularly the banks, which is why they're putting so much money into it and doing so much with it. And when you look at what banks are doing, they have some interesting use cases, of which these are the 6 main ones that I've identified. There are others, but these are the 6 main ones where I'm seeing a lot of startups, of which there's one here on our sponsor list of the Blockchain Week, Tallysticks, working with Barclays to do supply chain trade finance automation using distributed ledger technology shared between their corporate clients and the bank, which is quite controllable because it's between the customer and the bank. It's not something that has to be agreed by everybody on the whole planet, which is what a digital identity scheme would need. In payments, I'm really excited by companies like Abra, where, for example, Americans can now send remittances to people in the Philippines for free, near enough, and immediately. So Western Union's business model is completely bust, because why do you need Western Union with their 10% fee when you can do it for nothing on Abra? And they're going to spread the Abra remittance corridors across 45 countries in the next couple of years. That's based on Bitcoin blockchain as the background technology. Digital identity I've mentioned already, but companies like Evernym and CoinFirm are really interesting self-sovereign identity schemes, developing this technology as an open source structure that anybody can use to give me control of my life on the internet without anyone hacking into my identity and stealing it, because it's not centralized. It's really interesting. There's a great scheme in India called the Ad Hoc Program, which, if you haven't heard of it, is now almost 10 years old. And it's a digital identity scheme for everyone in India. They have 1.2 billion people on that identity scheme, and they're now using it to go cashless. But they developed it using a card that has a biometric record of who you are. Obviously, now it would be a mobile identity. And equally, on a centralized database, so you have a single point of failure, a single point of access, a single point of focus. This is why that's so important, because it's decentralized, distributed. A lot of the banking guys got very excited about how they could use blockchain for clearing and settlements, mainly because it's estimated that distributed ledgers, if they're agreed between the banks, can save about $20 billion a year in excess overhead costs in this one area. And Digital Asset Holdings is the leader in this area right now, doing some proof of concept with the Australian Stock Exchange and also with a number of other clients, one to watch. And if you're interested in those things, I wrote those use cases in detail and those companies in detail on the blog in August. So you can find out a lot more detail if you want to have it. But the bottom line is that we're going through a revolution in humanity by connecting everybody instantaneously, globally, one-to-one, peer-to-peer, device-to-device. And to do that, the internet was the start. We don't know what the finish will be, but certainly we know that an Internet of Value has to support an Internet of Things, and the Internet of Value is you're going to use this foundational technology of distributed ledgers and blockchain to build the next generation. But to do that next generation transformation involves so many agreements between governments, businesses, and citizens that it's going to take time to get the transformation in place. What we'll see to begin with is low-hanging fruit wins, where we can control environments internally or between counterparties that need trust between their processes. And that's really what the Internet of Value is all about, a globally connected network with a distributed ledger blockchain technology to support it. Without that, you can't have an Internet of Things, in my view. It won't work. So just to finish off, one of the big questions is, what are we building? In Victorian era, they had this idea of building a faster horse. This is a steam-powered horse. And if you can't read the words, it says, the steam horse, velocity, no sloppage on the road. And the problem was that in Victorian era, horses produced a lot of shit. And the roads were covered in manure, and it stank and was horrible. And if you look at Victorian pictures of London, they're not nice. They're smelly. And so the idea of a faster horse that's steam-powered made absolute sense, and yet it doesn't at all when we look at where we are today. But they had no concept of a car. And if you're looking at a car, what car do you want? The next BMW? The next Jag? Or a Tesla? Or a Google Apple car, a self-driving car? You know, these are not cars, though. They're not designed with car mentality thinking or auto manufacturing thinking. They're designed using a globally connected network technology thinking. Completely different thinking. And that's where I think we have problems right now with some of the things I've talked about, because the financial system is assuming a lot of the financial instruments will continue to work, but in a digitalized, distributed ledger structure, whereas they probably won't. You know, right now we're seeing the car appearing in Africa, Philippines, Indonesia, and Latin America. And what it is a low-cost, almost free, instantaneous, mobile network connected community that uses money in a completely different way. Completely different way. In microtransactions, when we think about the Internet of Things, that's billions of things, making trillions of transactions at very small amounts, all the time, non-stop, 24/7. We haven't got a financial system that's being built for that. This is what we're going to build. And when I look at the confusion around where that is coming from, there was a really interesting article from one Google engineer who said, in the future, you won't have Uber, you won't have taxis, you'll just have self-driving cars that own themselves, and to save a little bit of the money that's transacted through your rides to invest in their next generation offspring using a distributed ledger. Interesting times. I hope you enjoy them. Thank you.